going to start with Leviticus. This is fun. Okay, I'm a teacher, so I don't love like standing up here and talking at people. So I'm going to start with a little bit of interaction, all right? I know this comes at the end. Usually I'm also standing up here because those lights hurt my face. We're going to start with a little bit of interaction. I want to know what y'all already know about the book of Leviticus, or what we think we know, because I know that this is a book that is hard to understand and easy to skip over. So what are our impressions? What do we know about this book so far? It's a funny book. Bloody. It's a bloody book. There's priests, yeah. There's lots of sacrifice. I'm a teacher, I'll wait. Rules and regulations, a lot of law, right? Big words, yeah, we need a dictionary to help us read Leviticus. Yeah, okay, so that's where we're starting, and that's awesome. Here's where I'm hoping to go. Okay, here are our goals and objectives for today. The first thing I want to accomplish is I want to provide y'all with an overview of this book, okay? I want to help you to make some connections. I'm not going to be able to get into all those really cool, super nerdy details, but I'm hoping to make it at least a little more applicable in your life than it already is, which might be not at all. Second, I want to encourage you, okay? I want y'all to feel encouraged to open your Bibles and read it. I want you to feel encouraged to seek the Lord after this. If at any point in me talking up here you do not feel encouraged to open your Bible or seek the Lord, you need to leave because I'm doing something wrong, okay? So that's my goal for y'all. I want to give a new perspective, and I want y'all to make you think that Leviticus is awesome, okay? I like lofty goals, so we're going for that. Before we can get into the book, we got to do a little bit of background, right? We got to figure out where we've been. So if you're reading with us in 90 days, we've already gone past these books. And in the last 2 weeks, Kathy's talked about Genesis and Exodus. Okay, so we started at the very beginning, where God creates this good world, and he puts people in it. And then the people screw up. And we get the flood, and we get the dispersing of the nations, and then we get Abraham. This man that God calls and says, you're going to lead my people. You're going to be the father of nations. So we follow Abraham's family down into Egypt, down into Egypt. They spend 400 years in slavery in Egypt, and then we meet a man named Moses. And Moses hears God's call and rescues the people out of Egypt. They're on their way to the promised land, and they're in the wilderness, okay? So that's where we find ourselves. 400 years of slavery, we're in the wilderness. And God comes down to this group of people on top of a mountain, this mountain called Mount Sinai. And he gives his law, his 10 commandments. We're familiar with those, right? Don't kill people, honor your parents. He gives his law. What's cool about that I don't have time to talk about today, it's a marriage ceremony, okay? What's happening on the mountain at Mount Sinai when God is giving the law is the same thing that happens in an Israelite wedding ceremony. So it's super rad to see, if you could see the connection there. God is entering into a marriage covenant, okay? So then, after all that happens on the mountain, you get those 2 sections in Exodus that repeat each other, right? The one that says, God said, this is how you build the tabernacle. And then all the people built the tabernacle, okay? But that tabernacle is important. That tabernacle is the honeymoon suite, okay? That's where the people are going to go from the marriage, or from the wedding ceremony. They're going to start their marriage in this honeymoon suite, okay? But the problem is, we get down to the tabernacle. It's all set up and beautiful. The glory of the Lord fills it, and fire and smoke and all the things, and Moses can't go in. The very last line of Exodus tells us that Moses cannot enter the tabernacle. He can't go in. So we get Leviticus, okay? We get this book that's kind of a pause in between Exodus and Numbers, okay? Numbers starts, the first line of Numbers is, and God spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting. So somehow Moses got in there, and we have to figure out how, okay? And that's Leviticus. For lack of a better term, Leviticus is kind of like this owner's manual in the glove box of the tabernacle, okay? It's the thing that's going to teach us, like, what it is, what are all the parts, what do we do if it breaks, okay? So that's how we're going to loosely think about Leviticus. This verse I have up here, Exodus 19, this comes right before the wedding ceremony. What happens before a wedding? A proposal. So this is God down on his knee telling the Israelites, I want you to marry me. And he says, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession. Treasured possession is wedding language. That's what the groom would say to the bride during the vows, okay? You will be my treasured possession among all peoples. for the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Okay? That's the deal. If y'all want to get married, if you want to marry me, you'll be my treasured possession, but you have to be a kingdom of priests and you have to be a holy nation. Amen. Awesome. What's that? We know what priests are, but what's a kingdom of priests? How do we do that? Okay, is this the same thing as what we've known from down in Egypt? Enter Leviticus. Okay, I got to push the button, not just turn my page. Okay, one last thing before we can get into the book, and it's a little nerdy, but it's super fun because I'm an English teacher. The authors of the Bible use a ton of literary strategies, right, to design it. And it's really fun because you get to see these hidden patterns and things that they use to make it interesting. So they use this thing called a chiasm. Okay, and a chiasm, you'll see it all throughout the Bible. But what it does is it organizes the information in there into this repetition pattern, where the first section and the last section mirror each other. They do the same thing. And then you come in a level, and they mirror each other, and in, until you get to this central point. Okay, and this central point, that's the most important part. Yeah. You want to pay attention to what's at the middle of a chiasm. Okay, so the way that looks in Leviticus is the first section and the last section of the book are going to talk about your rituals of redemption. Okay, what kind of rituals we have to perform in order to be redeemed. Inside of that, you'll have two sections on the priesthood. Okay, what does it look like to be a priest? Because remember, we're supposed to be a kingdom of priests. Right. Inside of that, you'll get the holiness code. That's all your kosher laws and your thing that it tells you, eat this, don't eat that, you're unclean. And then the Day of Atonement is at the center. Okay. On top of that design, they do this other cool thing where in the first half, all of those sections are about me approaching God. How do I get to God as an individual? The back half of the book is all about me helping other people find their way back to God. Okay? It's so neat. I love nerdy things. That's as nerdy as we're going to get today, though, I think, okay? All right, so we're going to start with these rituals of redemption. I'm getting hot because I'm nervous. All right. In the first 7 chapters of the book, you're all excited to read Leviticus, right? You open it up, and you're like, I'm going to read this book, and it's going to be great. And here it goes. It says, if one of you sins against your neighbor, take a bull, bring it to the tent of meeting, put your hands on its head, slit its throat, cut it to pieces, sprinkle the blood, and burn it on the altar. And you're like, whoo! All right, God, that's fun. It's going to get better, though. Shannon said it's going to get better, so I'm going to keep reading. If you don't have a bull, take a goat, bring it to the tent of meeting, put your hand on its head, slit its throat, sprinkle its blood, cut it to pieces, and put it on the altar. Okay, if you got that far, good for you. I don't know why we can't start with love your neighbor by yourself, or like yourself, right? That would have been a good place to start. But the reason we have to start with all of these sacrifices is because before we can do anything else, we have to deal with our sense of guilt, okay? We have to understand that we are right with God. Before we can move into love your neighbor and care for the oppressed, we have to understand that we can approach God, okay? We have spent 400 years at this point among the Egyptian gods, right? I say we like I'm an Israelite. Go with me. We spent 400 years among these Egyptian gods. We know that they do good things sometimes, but usually they're scary, they're vengeful, you have to keep them happy or else, bad things happen and the rain doesn't come. So that's our experience with God. And all of a sudden, this creator of the universe wants to come and live among us. Nah, man, I'm good. I saw that guy up on the mountain, right? He was on that mountain in fire and smoke and thunder, and now he wants to live down here with us? We're guilty people. We can't handle that, right? Because the Israelites know that God's holiness is like the sun, okay? And the sun is this really, really good thing. It's really good. But if you get too close, it's also really dangerous, right? So they've got this awareness, and they know that they're guilty. So we have to deal with that first, okay? And the way they understand that is through sacrifice. So sacrifice, this is cool because this was that common cultural practice. They'd seen sacrifice before. They knew what it was. And so God says, okay, I'm going to meet y'all where you're at. I'm going to take sacrifice, something that you know about, tweak it just a little bit and make it holy. I'm going to holify this practice that you know and give it back to you as a gift so that you know that we're right. Okay? It's something that they'll understand, that they'll be able to experience rather than just hear. Because if they just heard or if we just hear, oh, you're fine, you're forgiven, are they really going to believe that? Maybe, but this way they get to see it, they get to experience it in their cultural context, okay? We have a missional call to partner with God and bless the nations. Okay, we've seen that that's what he told Abraham, and it's continued here. In order for these Israelites to follow that call, they have to know that they can partner with God. Yeah. So God gives them rules for how to do that. We see a bunch of different types of sacrifice in this section. Some of them are to say thank you, some are to say I'm sorry, some are just like everything's done and we're going to worship now, all different kinds, but we won't go into those because that doesn't necessarily feel as applicable today. Okay. The second time we see these rituals of redemption, remember it's going to be more about me helping others find their way to God this time. Okay? So we need to help people know that they're right with God. And the way we do that is we party and we care for the oppressed. Okay? We're going to talk about party today because it's super fun. And we need to do more of it. Okay? I'm an introvert and I'm telling y'all we need to do more of it. So all those sacrifices and offerings that we just learned about are now going to be used in feasts and in celebrations. Okay? Yeah. Festivals and Sabbath, they become times to redeem and to restore, to bring people back into the family. Yeah. Okay? God does this cool thing where he gives us a way for when someone gets lost to bring them back in. And we love that, right? We love, like, when we get lost, God's going to leave the 99 and chase us down. We sang it today. There's no shadow we can't hide in, right? He's going to find us no matter what. But are we active in pursuing that for other people? Right. And that's what God's telling us here, is that we need to be active in bringing other people back in. And the way we do that is by inviting them to the party. Okay? There are 6 major festivals that are talked about in this section, okay, plus the Sabbath. One of those, 1 out of 6, is a solemn assembly, like a day for fasting and self-examination and restraint. Only one. The other 5 are big feasts, okay, and some of them last for a week. Okay. Why? The reason we have so many celebrations is because you have to remember that the story is good. Okay? We have to remember that the story starts at Genesis 1 with a good God who created a good world, and he put humans in it and called them very good. And he told those humans, he gave them a blessing to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, right? And we have to see the Bible through that lens, because the problem is we start a lot of the time in Genesis 3. We start with the fall, and we see the Bible through this lens of humans messed up, and we got to get right with God. And humans sin, and they sin again, and they mess up again, and we just keep seeing human failure. But we're not meant to read it that way. We're meant to see it as a story of God continually saving people from their sin, continually redeeming people, continually taking it away from them, and it's a good story. So we have to read it through that lens, or else we forget the plot. And we don't want to forget the plot. Okay. So what is he calling us to remember? These are the festivals that are listed in the book. Okay. The first that I'm going to talk about is Sabbath. Sabbath it's not a festival. It's something that we do every week. Okay. Once a week, 52 times a year, you have a day of rest. A day where you stop working, you stop producing, stop consuming, you just stop and rest. Okay. You do 7 years of that. And on the 7th year, you get a full year of Sabbath, where you do all those things that you do on the weekend. Plus, you're also letting the land rest. The land is meant to rest. You're not planting, you're not growing, you're not harvesting. It's resting. If anybody owes you any money, you're canceling all your debts in that 7th year. Okay? Nice. Crazy, right? Then you have the year of Jubilee. Okay? So you do that Sabbath year 7 times. In your 50th year, you're going to have the year of Jubilee, where you do all of that. Plus, if you bought your land from somebody, that land goes back to its original owner. Okay? If you own a slave, that slave is free. Okay? And God does this. He gives us these rhythms of Sabbath so that we remember that we need to rely on him. Okay? We remember what it is to not have. Okay? Every 7 years, if you're not growing food for your family, you got to find it somewhere. And so you're looking to your neighbors for generosity. You're hoping God provides it miraculously from the ground. You're remembering what it is not to have. And we're remembering that we're not our possessions. Right? We are not our possessions. Our identity is not, I'm a millionaire or I'm poor. Like, that's not our identity. We cannot create that for ourselves. So what God does here is he's leveling the playing field so we can't determine who we are on our own terms. Okay? And because we remember these things, because we remember what it is to not have. We remember what it is to rely on God. We can then care for others who don't have and who need to rely on us for help, okay? All right, we'll go through the rest of the festivals real quick. We've got the Passover. Okay, we've heard about the Passover. We celebrate that for 7 days, and we remember when God redeemed us, when he saved us out of Israel. Or, I keep calling it Israel, out of Egypt. Out of Egypt. Then you've got the first fruits, Feast of First Fruits. You're giving him the first of your harvest. We're remembering his provision. 50 days later, you get Pentecost, the Feast of Weeks. Okay, God's provision and his giving of the law is what we're remembering. The Feast of Trumpets is New Year's. So we're remembering what God has done and looking forward to what is to come. The Day of Atonement, that's our one solemn day, and we'll talk about that later. And then the Feast of Booths, where we're remembering God leading us through the wilderness. We go camping for a week. We stay in shelters. We have a great time, okay? We remember that he led us through the wilderness. Okay. Deuteronomy isn't Leviticus, I know that, but like what Deuteronomy does is it repeats a lot of the law for us, okay? It gives us a summary, expands on what was there. Okay, yeah, so this chapter 14, expands on the Sabbath. It expands on all those feasts and festivals, gives us some more details about it. Okay, and verse 29 says, then the Levite, who has no portion or inheritance among you, the resident alien, the fatherless, and the widow within your city gates, may come, eat, and be satisfied. Okay, this is telling us that everybody has a seat at the table. Amen. Everybody. Amen. Okay, lots of food. If you're having a feast for a week, there's lots of food, and that's going to cost a lot of money, okay? The Levite, the immigrant, the refugee, the fatherless, the orphans, the widow, they're not going to have anything to give. They're not going to have that money to contribute for a week of celebrating, okay? But that doesn't mean they don't belong. That doesn't mean they don't belong, and in fact, it'll tell us that that's the very reason they do belong, that they may come, eat, and be satisfied, okay? We have to remember that the purpose of all of these festivals is to remember that we serve a God who restores and redeems. Yeah. Okay? We're bringing people back into the family. And we have to do this during like our own times of church celebration, right? We've got to get people together, invite them into the table, sit across from them and share our stories, share a meal. Okay, that's really, really important because like our country needs to see our church doing this now. Amen. Right? Our country, half of it hates the other half and thinks they're their enemy, and vice versa, right? So they need to see us coming together and sitting at the table and celebrating who our God is and that he is a God who restores and redeems. I wasn't going to tell this story, but I think I will. Because I was trying to not like tell stories, but I'm going to. I was at a party once recently. And I went, I'm sitting at the table and I'm eating my meal, having a great time. I'm at a party. And this guy comes and he sits at the table and he's wearing a very politically stated piece of clothing. And cool, right? My first thought was like, oh, man, like I gotta sit by this guy. I gotta sit by this guy who like, he hates everything that I am, and I'm not really his biggest fan either, like, you know, what he stands for. And I gotta sit by this guy, like, we're gonna be here for a while. I was like, what am I gonna do? And then I was like, Lord, oh wait, yeah, God, how do I love this guy? What do I do? How do I love this guy? And I seriously had that conversation with him in my head. And then you know what? We had a really nice conversation, me and that man. Yeah. I learned a lot about his life and what he did, and we just had a really pleasant time. And if I had let that nonsense of, I don't like your clothes and what your clothes mean, get in the way, like what kind of example of the story is that? Right. Not a very good one, okay? So anyway, we ask him to help us to invite people to the table if we can't do it on our own, right? Yeah. Okay, we come to the table, we celebrate, we are made right with God, we need to make right with others, okay? Oh, because these earthly celebrations are preparing us for the ultimate wedding feast, right? One day, we'll get there in about 80 days. One day, we're going to have this huge wedding feast with Jesus, and he's going to say, this is my bride, and welcome, and we're going to eat and celebrate. And we might get there. We might open up our eyes and be really excited, and all of a sudden, we might be surrounded by those people. Like, you know those people, the ones who we think, like, oh, they're not going to be there. They can't be there. They shouldn't be there. I don't want them there, right? Because For all different reasons, we think they're not going to be there. But if our response to that is not utter celebration and utter gratitude for the grace and the love that is our God, then we've missed the point of the story. Okay? And we can't miss the point of the story, which is to redeem and restore as we have been. Okay. Whew. He agrees. New Testament break. I'm going to give you a break. We're going to go in the New Testament for a minute because Jesus also tells us that when a life is turned around, we party. Okay? We throw a party. In Luke 15, there's a story about a woman who loses her coin. Okay? And she searches and searches and searches for it. And when she finds it, she throws a party. A party that's probably cost her more than that silver coin was worth, right? There's a shepherd who loses his sheep. He leaves his flock to find the sheep, brings it back, and throws a party. Then we get the prodigal son. We love this story, right? Prodigal son takes his inheritance, squanders it in a life of debauchery and chaos, comes back because he's like, well, this sucks. Can I say sucks? This is terrible. I'm going to come back and be a slave in my father's house. And the father runs out to meet him and is like, oh my gosh, he kisses him, gives him a ring, puts a robe on his back, and says, we're going to throw a party because this son that I had was dead, and now he's alive. So we're going to throw a party. Okay? So we remember and we celebrate God's redemption and forgiveness when people come home, both in Luke and Leviticus, believe it or not. Okay. Priesthood. The second and the sixth section both talk about the priesthood. Okay? So now that we've learned what it is to be right with God, we're going to learn about the priests in this kingdom of priests. Okay? Once we've established that we're right with God and with each other, we can learn what it means to be a priest. Okay, there's an additional set of rules that the regular Israelite doesn't have. And what that does is it teaches the Israelites why they have a different set of rules than the rest of the nations around them, right? And they do that through like 4 different ways. The priests are going to do 4 different things that help set them apart, okay? The first is they put God on display, okay? This is a priest, and that guy's going to be wearing that wandering through the Negev, the desert. Okay, he's got this cool turban, a little sparkly diadem, this fancy sparkly breastplate shield called an ephod, this long, bright blue robes with little bells and pomegranates down on the bottom. Okay, it tells us all about it in chapters 8 through 10. Okay, now I don't know if any of y'all have ever been to the desert, but it's dry and hot and dusty and really brown. Okay, so this guy wandering around the desert, walking all around, he's going to stick out like a sore thumb. You're going to see that guy from a mile away, okay? And that's on purpose. That's on purpose. He's trying to put God on display. He's showing the nations that our God is different, okay? Our God is different. And he calls us at the beginning to be a holy nation, right? Holy, the word is kadosh. Say kadosh. You know, Hebrew scholars. Okay, kadosh means holy. It means set apart, different, unique. Okay? Doesn't mean perfect. Matthew gets that wrong. Doesn't mean perfect. It means different. Okay? And our priest here looks funny because our God looks funny in comparison to all the other gods that we know. Okay? He's different. And that's because he is gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. Right? And it tells us that if all the other nations are one way, you are to be kadosh. You are to be gracious, compassionate, full of steadfast love. Okay, and abounding in steadfast love, whatever. All right. The second thing the priest is going to do is help people navigate their atonement. Okay? That just means that when somebody has a sacrifice to offer because they've wronged their neighbor, they're going to bring their goat to the tabernacle, and the priest is going to tell them, yeah, that's the right one, or no, you actually need 2 pigeons for this. Okay? He's going to help them with that, help them to be right with God. And those sacrifices that we talked about at the beginning, half of them are meals. Half of them, you're going to take your neighbor who you've wronged and your goat, and you're going to walk to the tabernacle. And the priest is going to offer part of that goat to God. And then he's going to cook up the rest of it. And y'all are going to sit and have a meal together. Okay? Because you're only going to have a meal with somebody who you're in right relationship with. In this culture, you're not just sitting down to eat with somebody you don't trust. Okay? This is something sacred and special that you're sharing with people you're in relationship with. So the priest is facilitating that. Okay. Third thing we have to do is intercede on behalf of others. Okay, the priest is meant to stand in the gap. So when God gives Moses the 10 Commandments, this is their wedding, right? Their wedding. Moses goes down the hill. And I don't know if y'all remember this part, but he goes down the mountain, and the Israelites have created this golden calf. And they're worshiping and dancing and singing around this golden calf, right? Now, this is their wedding. If I walk down the aisle at my wedding and my husband's making out with the bridesmaid, we're going to have a problem, right? God thinks the same thing. God is like, no, I'm going to wipe those people out. You don't do this at our wedding celebration. I'm going to knock them off the face of the earth. Moses, I'm going to take you, and I'm going to make you into a nation because, you know what's up. Moses, instead of being like, yeah, God, you're right. Those guys suck. Those guys are getting it all wrong. Why would you want to help them? They're getting it all wrong. Instead of that, what Moses does is he falls on his face and says, no, God, do not do that. Don't do that. And you know why? Because it's going to ruin your reputation. If you do that, all those Egyptians who know who you are, they saw you bring us out of Egypt. They saw that happen. They're going to know that you brought them out to kill them. And that's just really bad for your reputation, God, so don't do it. Okay? And God listens. God listens. I don't know that I would listen if the other bridesmaid spoke up and was like, no, it's cool. I'd be like, no, it's not, right? But God is. He says, okay. And what Moses is doing is he's acting as a priest. He's standing in the gap between God and Israel, okay? And what his job there is he's telling Israel what God is saying, but then also pleading for the people of Israel for God, okay? And the priest is showing Israel that that's now their job. Their job is to stand in the gap as a kingdom of priests, to stand in the gap between God and the rest of the world, okay? And that's still our role today, okay? Do we know that? Do we know that that's our job? And I think yes. I think we do. But I think sometimes we also forget. And I think sometimes in our standing in the gap, we're really good at blocking people from God. Not always, but sometimes. I think we do. I think we can make sure that people understand why they're not welcome. Why they're not welcome rather than why they are. We're quick to tell people whether, straight to their face or some other way, we're quick to tell people why they're outside of God's will, right? Or outside of God's design. We'll make really great political statements, really great Facebook posts. We'll support all sorts of protests and things about what we believe. But in that, we get in the way and we're blocking people from God. Instead, what we should be trying to do is trying to find any loophole imaginable to get people before our God. That's what Moses did. He used God's reputation to get those people back in good graces with God. Okay. It's really easy for us to say who's not in because, they're sinners or they're outside God's will. Their lifestyle is wrong. Their politics are wrong. Their religion is wrong. Oh, they're not saved. They're not saved. And sometimes I don't think we actively block people, but maybe we just step out of the gap and we're like, God, they don't care. They don't care, so why do I care? Or that's too far removed from me. That's somebody else's problem. I don't know them, so whatever, okay? That's not our call. Try not to get heated. Our call is to be a blessing to the nations, right? From the very, very beginning, he says you are called to be a blessing to the nations. And we have to find a loophole, okay? I heard somebody talk about how one day, maybe he'll stand before God, and God's going to be like, yeah, that guy over there, you found a loophole for that guy? It was this big. That was a loophole, man. But I would rather have God say that to me, that I found, this crazy loophole, than have the conversation with him where he says, Shannon, why didn't you tell my story? Why didn't you show people my grace and my love and my forgiveness? Right? Okay. Okay, the fourth thing that the priests do is they're going to distribute resources to those who are in need. Okay? Those who have extra, they're going to bring it to the tabernacle. Okay? The priest is going to take some for themselves, and then they're going to give away the rest to those who are in need. Okay? Priest isn't trying to make things equal. He's just trying to make it appropriate. right? God says the world is out of balance, and your job is to bring shalom. Make sure shalom happens. Okay? It says to give to those who need, but never once does it address why they're in need. Never once does it say, give to those in need, oh, unless it's their fault. Or unless you know they're going to use it for something bad. Okay? Or unless you don't think that they're living the right way they're supposed to live with that money you give them, with that time you give them. It never says that. It just says give to those who are in need. Okay? And we do that because we're putting God on display, and our God is generous. So we need to tell the story that our God is generous. Okay, we have to notice, we have to care, we have to do something about it. Okay? Well, we're getting close to the middle. We've got the holiness code next. This is the fun part that everybody loves. These are the kosher laws. These are the you're unclean and the do this and don't do this. Exactly. Okay? What this is it's a section of laws for the people, right in the middle of all the sections of laws of the priest. Okay? So what God is saying is, okay, y'all know how to be a priest now. Fly, go be priests, go do it. It's your turn because you're a kingdom of priests, not a kingdom with priests. Okay? So, go be different. Chapters 11 through 15 talk about like a personal holiness code, right? Our ritual purity. It explains what's clean and what's unclean. Okay? And a person becomes unclean or impure by having contact with death, right? And that could be things like reproductive fluids or dead bodies, skin disease, mold, certain foods, right? These things make you unclean. Now, being unclean doesn't mean sinful. It doesn't mean wrong. It doesn't mean bad. Like, I hope some of y'all married people are unclean more than once a month, is all I'm saying, right? It's okay to be unclean. What's not okay is going into God's presence that way, okay? So what he's going to show us is how to make ourselves clean so that we can then re-enter God's presence. Second part, chapters 17 through 20, tell us about moral purity. That's that communal holiness, okay? How we're supposed to act with each other. And that, again, we're called to be different from the surrounding nations, right? And we see that through the way that we're caring for the poor, through having integrity in our relationships, through pursuing social justice. That's what those chapters talk about. Okay, it's saying if we're going to put God on display, we have to tell the right story. Okay, I know. Yes, I'm working on it. If we're going to put God on display, we have to tell that right story. Okay, we're pulling for people because God pulls for us. Okay, chapter 19. I thought that this would be a good one to sit in for a minute because in my Bible, chapter 19 is titled Laws of Holiness. So I'm like, great, awesome. If I want to know how to be holy, this is what I'm going to read. If I want to know all the laws that are in Leviticus, the laws of the laws, I'm going to read this chapter, okay? But before I did, I sat down and I was like, okay, God, what's the story you want to tell here? What am I going to learn about you and your character in this, how you would treat people? And what's at the heart of each of these commands here? Because I know God's not just telling people to do something just to tell them to do something, right? He doesn't pull the because I said so card. There's a reason for this, so I want to know what it is, okay? So what I found was a whole bunch of things that God is. First, we see that God is generous, right? In verse 10, he says, leave them, talking about the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and the resident alien. So God's generous, so I'm to be generous, okay? God's honest. Do not steal. Do not act deceptively or lie to one another. Do not swear falsely. Okay? God's generous, or God's honest, so I'm to be honest. God is just. Don't act unjustly when deciding a case. Don't be partial. Judge your neighbor fairly. So I'm to be just. God's forgiving. He says, don't harbor hatred. Do not take revenge or bear a grudge, but love your neighbor as yourself. So I'm to be forgiving. We're going to pause on that because, you know, when Jesus says that, and he's talking to all the legal teachers of the law and the legal people, he's fighting legalism using Leviticus, and I think that's great. Be respectful. God is respectful. We're going to honor the old, so I'm to be respectful. Okay. Last, God is loving, and he cares for the oppressed. You will regard the alien who resides with you as the native born. You are to love him as yourself. So I'm to be loving and care for the oppressed. Those are those. That's not in my notes, but those are those Afghan refugees, those are the Ukrainian refugees, the people from Venezuela and El Salvador and Mexico, the people from Syria and Yemen and Chad and Sudan and Ethiopia and Eritrea and all these countries you've never even heard of, like that's them. But we're gonna move on. All right, we made it. We made it to the middle, okay? The Day of Atonement. This is the point. Remember, our chiasm is pointing to a central point, and this is it, okay? The Day of Atonement is the center of this book on purpose. And not only is it the center of Leviticus, but it's also the center of the entire Torah. Okay? So in Torah, you see the structure. And the first book is Genesis, the last is Deuteronomy. Then you get Exodus and Numbers. In the middle, you get Leviticus. And in the middle of Leviticus is the Day of Atonement. Okay? This is an important day. It's a big deal. So I put a map up here. I'm going to get a little nerdy on this day too. Okay, because in this day, he's saying the same thing he's saying throughout all of Torah. I'm taking your sin, and I'm getting rid of it. Okay? In the sacrifices we see at the beginning of the book, I'm going to come over, I'm going to come over here so that I could point, because I'm a teacher and I point at things, okay? What we see is the priest is going to take the animal that you've brought as your sacrifice, and he's going to sprinkle the blood, and he's going to start here at the entrance, and he's going to put it on the altar. Okay, and then he's going to take your sacrifice in. He's going to take your sin into the tent of meeting to right where that squiggly line is. Okay, that squiggly line is the curtain that's the barrier to the most holy place. Okay, the most holy place is where God's presence lives. So he's going to take your sin, symbolized by the blood of that animal, sprinkle it onto that curtain. Okay, now the house of God, where God is dwelling, bears your sin and you don't anymore. Okay, that's a symbol of sacrifice. On the Day of Atonement, he goes the opposite way. What he's going to do is he's going to start way inside that curtain, in that most holy place. And he's going to put the blood of that animal right on God's throne. He's going to go right into God's presence and put your sin on God's throne. Okay, and then he's going to bring it out. Okay, but we're going to pull back a minute. This is a big tribe, right? According to the census and numbers, there's 600,000 plus people living in Israel right now. Okay, so undoubtedly, there's been times during this year where sin has gone unnoticed or it's gone undealt with. People have wronged their neighbors. They've, hurt people or disrespected God in some way. Okay? So we have one day, this one solemn assembly where everybody comes to the tent of meeting. Everybody comes in, and we're going to deal with all that undealt with sin today. Okay? On that day, Aaron, our high priest, is going to bring a bull and a ram to sacrifice for his family. Okay? He's also going to bring 2 goats and a ram for all of the Israelites. Okay? So 2 goats, just 2 for 600,000 plus people. That sounds like grace to me, but we'll get there. He's going to take that bull, like I said, he's going to slaughter it. He's going to sprinkle that blood 7 times right on God's throne. Okay? He's going to take it in to God's throne, that mercy seat, put the blood on it. He's now saying, you have cleansed me of my sin. God is holding on to it. Now I'm clean, so I can go atone for the rest of the Israelites. Okay, I've been made right. Now I'm going to take care of everybody else. So he takes that first goat for the Israelites, sacrifices it, takes that blood, puts it on the mercy seat, goes into God's presence, puts it on God's throne. Now God is holding Aaron's family and his sin, and then all the Israelites and all their sin. All that blood is on the mercy seat, okay? Now what Aaron has to do is he has to take the bull and the goat, the blood from there, and he's going to make atonement for God's house. Weird, right? Because remember, all year, they've been putting people's sins into the tabernacle. They've been dumping them in the tabernacle so that the people could be free. But now the tabernacle is full of sin. It's full of all that dirty stuff that people didn't want to hold on to anymore. Okay? So Aaron goes back out of God's presence, and on that altar at the very front, he's going to put that bull and that goat to clean God's house. He's got to clean God's house out now. Okay? So that all goes on the altar. Whew. All right. So now everybody's clean. Aaron's clean, the Israelites are clean, God is clean, and it's all on this altar. Okay? But there's a second goat. He's going to take that second goat now and put all the sin of all of those people, plus God's house, on that one goat. That poor little goat. The poor little guy is going to have all of it, right? That goat is called the Azazel, the scapegoat. Okay? And what they're going to do with that goat, once it's got everybody's sin, they're going to send it out into the wilderness, they're going to wave at it, and they're going to watch their sin leave. They get to watch it leave. God is saying, you are free. That sin is no longer yours to hold on to. It is gone. Okay? We're watching that happen. Later tradition said that there was a priest that would go with the goat and he'd push it off a cliff so that it couldn't wander back into camp. Because imagine you're doing your laundry and here comes Azazel with everybody's sin on it. That'd be a problem, right? So it's gone, and we're celebrating that it's gone. Okay, but now we've got these two other rams. If you're remembering, we got 2 extra rams that are still here. What we're going to do with those is we're going to offer them as a burnt offering to God. Okay, and what that does is it says it's done, it's finished, and we're worshiping. It's the same kind of offering that Noah gave when he came off the ark after the flood. Okay, so he came off the ark after the flood, after all the earth was wiped clean, and he says, here's your offering, God. We're worshiping you. Now, everything has been clean. All the sin has been wiped out of this community, so we offer an offering to worship God. Okay, so that's what's happening. It's ugly. It's an ugly day because we're dealing with sin, and sin introduces death into the world, right? And we know that from Genesis 3. Sin brings death into the world, so we have to deal with that. But now, what happens is God doesn't demand that, we pay for our sin. He takes it from us. He invites us all in, takes it from us, and sends it away. Okay? Israel now knows for certain that they can be in God's presence, which was their fear at the beginning of the book, right? Okay, that sounds like Jesus to me. Sounds a lot like Jesus to me. But this was a way for people to walk out that kind of grace and forgiveness long before Jesus was here. Okay. Don't freak out. This one's got a lot of scripture, but it's going to be good. Okay. We have to understand that this wasn't just a New Testament understanding. Okay. When we neglect Leviticus and when we neglect the Hebrew Bible, we miss 2/3 of the story. Okay. It's like picking up a book and starting in the last chapter and thinking you got it. Okay. We miss the character development. We miss 2/3 of the plot line. Okay. And what you'll see is that the story doesn't change much. The story's kind of the same the whole way through. Okay. The Israelites didn't go into exile because they forgot to give sacrifices. They didn't go into exile because they didn't follow the law right. God wasn't mad because they weren't keeping the law. It wasn't all about I have to keep the law or I'm in trouble. It wasn't about that, ever. It was the reason they went into exile was because they forgot who their God was. They forgot to be priests who bless the nations and bring them into the family. Okay? They forgot the story. If you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe King David. King David in Psalm 40 says, you do not delight in sacrifice and offering. You open my ears to listen. You don't ask for a whole burnt offering or sin offering. Maybe that's just one and done. Maybe that was the only. Nope. He says again in Psalm 51, you do not want a sacrifice or I would give it. You're not pleased with the burnt offering. The sacrifice pleasing to God is a broken spirit. You will not despise a broken and humbled heart. Okay? Oh, but that's David. David was God's favorite. David didn't have to do anything, and God just loved him. Okay, the priest, Samuel, says, does the Lord take pleasure in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? Look, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to pay attention is better than the fat of rams. We got to pay attention. We have to notice, we have to care, and we have to do something about it. Micah, the prophet, later says, what should I bring before the Lord when I come to bow before God on high? Should I come before him with burnt offerings, with year-old calves? Oh, would the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams and 10,000 streams of oil? Should I give my firstborn for my transgression, the offspring of my body for my sin? No. Mankind, he has told each of you what is what is good, and what it is that the Lord requires of you, to act justly, to love faithfulness, and to walk humbly with your God. Okay, and then Hosea repeats it, for I desire faithful love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. It was never about the sacrifice. Remember, that sacrifice was a cultural practice. God met the Israelites where they were and gave them something they'd understand, but it was never about that. It was always about grace, and it was always about redemption. Okay? that's better than what I practiced at home. Okay, So we're going to wrap it up with a little bit of New Testament, because I know we love a little Jesus. And this is Peter, who's my favorite. And Peter is writing in this chapter, and he says, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession." So I hope we're recognizing that language from God's proposal, right? We're to be a kingdom of priests, kadosh, a holy nation, and God's treasured possession. That you may proclaim the praises of the one who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, remembering we weren't a people, but now you are God's people. You once had not received mercy, but now you have. Okay? So Peter is reminding the people that he's writing to that they are in a marriage covenant with God. What's cool about that, Peter's writing to the Gentiles. Peter's inviting the nations into this marriage covenant. He's being a priest to the nations. This restoration that Peter is talking about here is why we can be here, right? This promise that was for the Israelites has now been brought to the nations. So I think that's so rad. Oh, it's remembering that the end goal is always restoration. It's always to be that blessing to the nations, to be a priesthood that's telling the right story about our God and inviting people to the party. Okay. We're excited because I went to college. Here's the thing. So I don't just open up the book of Leviticus and, I understand, right? I say that I believe in this book, so I'm going to figure out what the heck it says, right? I'm going to figure out what's in this, and it's going to take some work, right? I got to spend some time doing it. But I did that, and I wanted to understand this book, so this is what I used. They're good resources. If anybody wants any, take them. The Bema Discipleship Project is this Jewish follower of Jesus, so that's really interesting. All kinds of things. Sabbath and Epic of Eden are books if you like to read. The others were videos and things. Okay? Thank you. No, that's not what I meant. I'm just breathing because I feel like I ran a marathon, and I appreciate y'all being here.